Hi all, welcome to the World Championship match 2024 round 12 coverage. So Ding Liren is with the white pieces in this game against Gukesh and he's trading by 1 point. So my expectations for this game was that actually Gukesh would just play a solid boring opening and try and draw the rest of the games to win the match. So was this to happen? Let's see. So we see the English opening from Ding Liren. One of the fundamental ideas of the English opening is trying to get a central pawn majority. That's one of the kind of ideas behind it sometimes. We have e6, okay, g3, d5, bishop g2, knight f6, knight f3, and now this really took me by surprise, d4. It's kind of echoing the day before the game the day before, which white won. We're entering into hypermodern territory. Hypermodern strategies, one of the classic hypermodern strategies, is to try and invite the opponent to take occupation of the center so we can undermine it later, try and prove that it's a weakness. But yeah, Gukesh seemed to fancy his chances to play this. A more kind of boring and solid approach would have been, say, bishop e7. And, you know, if someone wants a draw, this can be quite understandable. Just play like this, the solid Slav triangle, or c6 straight away. And then, you know, get this solid Slav triangle. This is what I would consider to be expected. A small edge for white, but pretty solid for black. And let alone, yeah, some other variations, maybe, you know, d takes c4 as well to be considered. But d4, yeah, it took me by surprise. So we have now potentially a reverse kind of modern Benoni being set up. So knight c6, we have e3. The Benoni was very popular in 1960. It was something Mikhail Tal would play and become world champion with it, with the black pieces. But here we're kind of getting reverse modern Benoni the way it's played soon. Well, not here, the way it could have been played. We have bishop e7. If d takes e3, f takes, we can see we've got a central pawn majority, which could be dangerous for black. So say queen d3, this is a minor nuisance. White can get an advantage with queen b3. It doesn't matter about the double pawns. The point is, once we get this central pawn majority, things get more dangerous for black. Not only that, we have this semi-open f file, which could be useful. White overall has an advantage here. If e5, this is like looking like a modern Benoni in reverse. And actually, in this particular situation, white can claim a small edge here, a small advantage. Or if bishop takes a3, no matter, it doesn't matter about the double pawns. Again, a small edge for white. So e5 is kind of reverse modern Benoni. But in the game, after e3, we have bishop e7, d3, and now d takes e3, bishop takes e3. Okay, so this is an interesting position. I mean, there's also other options, but bishop takes e3 seems less fragile than f takes e3, even though it promises the f file. Yeah, this position, it looks as though maybe it is interesting to consider, for sure, but there's enough analysis in the game I've got to show you already. So bishop takes e3. Let's just go with that. Bishop takes e3. We have e5. So it seems structurally this is a backward pawn, and black seems on the surface to be doing very well with the black pieces on the surface. Knight c3, black castles, rook e1. Now we have h6, a3, and here there are very subtle moves which can accumulate to become a complete disaster scenario. This happens in chess. Steinitz observed it happening when he stopped playing crazy gambits. Steinitz played a new positional style of chess which was called cowardly by his contemporaries, his opponents called cowardly, but he was accumulating advantages. They didn't know what was going on until it was too late. Then combinations were kind of naturally occurring after he'd accumulated advantages. And here a5, and even engines, it's hard at certain levels to say is this a kind of slight inaccuracy compared to rook e8? I would say if the evaluations become equal, sometimes it's better, sometimes, trying to be non-committal, it's better to go sometimes in general with non-committal pawn moves because pawns don't go backwards. So if rook e8, b4 isn't such a big deal, it seems. This position, okay, a6 here might be useful, and it shouldn't be such a big deal. As example, it should be an even position. If we went crazy with b5, knight a5, this position, we can play knight d5. And we get an interesting scenario here where it goes into equality. It's an interesting scenario. There's dynamics for both sides, like knight c6, d4. It goes into an even position. But yeah, the toss-up between rook e8 and a5 is interesting philosophically. How would you decide? Limited engine depth. Would you choose a move which is basically reversible? Rook e8 is fundamentally reversible, but pawns don't go backwards. So a5, we get this kind of delicate, slippery slope, which I found fascinating. How it really accumulated to be potentially let's see how it accumulated. So h3 is played. If d4, white should be able to get a small edge, but note that there's another irreversible thing going on, some simplification here, and even more so potentially with queen takes d4. And even if white technically has a small edge, it's sometimes more difficult to convert these small edges when the queens are off. So h3 is like one of those tension maintaining moves. When tension is maintained, it's a useful move. It's not too many weaknesses. The trade-off between creating weaknesses and securing squares like g4, there's always that trade-off. Here it seems to be okay. We have bishop e6. Now king h2, and now this is a slight inaccuracy. It seems that rook b8 here is a slight inaccuracy. I mentioned rook e8 before. It might be useful here. It gives the perk of, often, well, in chess, when you play a move, you're often vacating a square. So bishop f8 being vacated. Let's say knight b5, bishop f8. And this position, bishop f5, it seems as though it should be even. So rook b8, is this a subtle inaccuracy, which engines pick up on? We have queen c2. The other thing about the a5 move, it means that b5 might be useful to white sometimes, and it's shown here that knight b5 is also interesting to consider. If knight h7, queen e2, knight g5 is pretty fancy from black, but it might be limiting white's advantage to take out the f3 knight here. This position, it does seem as though white's advantage is minimized. So maybe knight b5 isn't so dangerous. If knight a7 is considered, this is weird and wonderful, but we are threatening structural damage. The thing is, yeah, knight d4 looks like a key move for black. So if we take on e5, c6 kind of strands the knight looks kind of trappable. So this position, if the knight has to sacrifice itself, we reach a weird and wonderful scenario here, which is even, it seems. This is all weird and wonderful stuff. If knight takes a7, sure, then white might have a small edge here, and it would have been useful to get rid of that defender of e5. So we do have a small edge here. Black's under more pressure overall. But, okay, so queen c2 seems pretty sensible. Rook e8, and now knight b5 here. Bishop f5, so that pawn is pinned to the queen. Rook ad1, and now this is another slight inaccuracy. It really seems as though there's this slippery slope which has been slid down by black. So what would have been better than knight fd7? Why is it so bad? Why is it bad at all? If we look at bishop f8 by contrast, well, it keeps the knight central. It means that the rook's involved in potentially e4 sometimes. Let's put something on the board here, an unpinning move, queen c3. So we have d4 as a potential idea. Queen c8, b3, knowing that the b5 knight protects a3 here. White can claim a small edge, but is it more than a small edge? So we are threatening to double the pawns. Knight h7, f4. It does seem here, these situations seem as though black should be actually okay as far as I can tell. So let's just continue to see any other evidence that crops up. Bishop f4, c6. Now this is chaos territory. Knight e to d6, chaos territory with e5 under fire. Black has knight g4 check. Rook takes first before playing c takes. And we end up in a scenario which should be even here if c takes is played. It's opposite coloured bishops there, at least. Yeah, but there is an imbalance there. No, but overall this should be even. If bishop takes to avoid double pawns, knight g5 has bishop e4 as a threat. And this is actually, interestingly, in black's favour after bishop e4. It seems as though this is in black's favour. I'll give you an example. Yeah, the light square weaknesses around the king mean that we get variations which are dangerous, like this one, queen d5 check, rook a8, queen f5 check, rook takes a3, and you can see that there's dangers for the white king. So anyway, this is all weird and wonderful, but it shows, I just wanted to show actually, bishop f8 might be more precise than this kind of decentralizing move, knight d7. But it looks as though, you know, this game in the day yesterday, we get Benoni themes. This is a Benoni theme, knight d2 to c4 against Benoni, and here it's like a Benoni theme recipe is being used. But is it right here? We have a super accurate move that Ding Liren plays in this position, which is queen d2. So the positional threat now is now d4, which will get rid of this backward pawn and open up the pieces a bit more. And with the centre blown wide open, there's also something about black's position. Usually I think about king soft spots. If you look at Mikhail Tal games, if you see, you know, quite a few of them, you start to think, oh, there's king soft spots where it's only the king, really valuable piece, protecting pawns. But there's also a queen soft spot here, which we're not just dissolving this pawn for the sake of it. We're actually getting this access for bishop f4 in many variations. The queen soft spot, it's only the queen holding c7 in this position. So actually the point of d4 would be to try for bishop f4 later. It's an incredibly easy idea to underestimate as black. It has to be said. And black continues going down this very faint, subtle, slippery slope with bishop g6. If knight c5, it's better than the game, but white would still have an advantage because of the, you could call it the queen soft spot. d4 e takes, we play knight takes d4, and this is also a way of playing it. But here, yeah, queen e2 with a small edge. If knight d3 here, knight takes e5, this position, we go down the exchange, but we're picking up 2 pawns for the exchange. 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 pawns for the exchange here, and quite a dominating looking position. It's an advantage for white. So if knight c5 is better than the game, it's not that convincing either. This position is not that convincing. Okay, so bear in mind, yeah, we don't have to use the bishop f4 idea. I'm just mentioning that exists with d4 break, pawn break here. But we do have we have bishop g6, so d4 now. And for the hackers looking at this commentary, yeah, bishop takes, don't do it. That's not even good for bullet chess. Bishop f6. There's the queen's by herself here. There's no point doing that. So d4, we have e4. Now here, yeah, what I've said before about this bishop f4, it holds true very clearly here in this position, that the queen soft spot is highlighted. So yes, it seems to be connected with that faint little inaccuracy that was played before, the bishop just moving back, that somehow this variation is a lot more dangerous with bishop f4. if we go to knight f takes d4, also this is also dangerous for black in any case. So e takes d4, bishop f4 though, how does black actually respond here to c7? So if rook c8, knight f takes d4, knight takes, queen takes, and b7 under fire, and let's say knight c5, guess what white plays here for 100 points? White actually has the tactical knight takes c7. If queen takes, rook takes, yeah, we've just taken that pawn, and this is a big advantage for white. For example, b4 here, knight d5, knight takes. We're just a clear pawn up here with a nasty pin, hitting that bishop. Yeah, it's fascinating about bishop f4, yeah. Let alone knight f takes d4. So this is actually really bad news. Yeah, that queen soft spot makes this really bad news for the black position. So e4, this doesn't look right now because past potential central pawn mobility looks really dangerous here. And there's different aspects to this as well. There's a very concrete aspect with the queen sitting on d2, that sometimes d5 will simply win the a5 pawn if the knight's shoved away, pushed away. So anyway, after this move, we have the move knight g1. So there is an issue already, d5 for queen takes a5, there is an issue here. Knight b6 goes down this faint slippery slope yet again. It's more difficult to find resistant moves actually here. Bishop f8, we can play knight e2, which seems like a natural way of just evolving the position with little risk, just improving Karpov style, just improving the knight, going to f4. And if f5, which looks very committal, is one of the better moves, that looks very unfortunate. f3, and this way knight f4 is even possible, hitting the bishop. And this is a nice advantage for white. And if bishop f7, taking on f3, again, it looks as though black's trying to give resistance, but it looks as though these central pawns are just giving white a lot of options. So if bishop f8 is more resistance, it's pretty grim. But knight b6 is going down this slope again, and actually we have here the move queen c3. Yeah, the pawn is attacked. Queen c3 supports the pawn, and does mean it looks as though d5 is on the way in some lines. There was also another idea, bishop f1, and here, in fact, f3 is interesting. E takes, knight c8. We could play c5, and here d5, knight takes, bishop takes, knight e5. We could end up in a situation where rook takes, bishop takes, queen e2, where black's under great pressure here. Because we've got this incoming passed pawn in the centre. Yeah, forget taking on a5 in these lines. If bishop f5, g4, bishop g6, we've got a very strong position ready for a big passed pawn. If bishop takes d5, bishop c4, we're going to win the exchange here in this line. So yeah, bishop f1 is possible as an alternative move, but queen c3 seems simple and strong. We have bishop f6, which seems logical to pin the pawn against the queen, but it is also yet another inaccuracy. It's amazing how black's going down this slope. f5 looks like a really committal move again with pawns, and f3 seems on the surface a bit strange maybe because it's slightly weakening, but it's to break open this bishop. If rook c8, f takes knight e2, and we're going to have white's having a marvelous time here. This position unpin, and looking at e4, that's a real liability in this position. If king h8, we can just take here, knight takes c4, there's bishop f5 hitting the rook. knight e3, bishop takes, rook takes, and knight f4. These variations tend to favour white. This looks incredibly scary. This is not something a human would play anyway. These variations favour white. So check. Let's take it further. Winning material. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, f5 doesn't look right in any case. And yeah, e takes, knight takes this position. Bishop f4 looking at c7, that queen soft spot. We could play knight e5 here. So black can't take, d takes, opening up to the queen. Black can't take, and here knight takes. This is a disaster area for black. So anyway, bishop f6. We have queen c2. And now a4 is a pawn which is potentially just dropping off quite easily now. If king h8, we could play d5 and then bishop takes b6. And here just take out e4. Yeah, just take out that centre pawn. If bishop h5, g4, this position, a4, big advantage. If queen d7, knight e2, this position, knight f4, c5, and now we could just take on d5 and play knight c3, and here queen b3 as one example. There's so much pressure on the position. Knight b5 looking at c7, d5 the pawns start moving, d6 the pawns are really dangerous in this line, bishop f4, and there's too much pressure on the black position. As one example, check, we can take rook d5, queen takes f3, and the resulting scenarios are in white's favour here. So anyway, a4 is played. We have knight e2. Now this one makes things more clearly worse for black, bishop g5. If knight a5 though, let's take the alternative, knight a5. Things are already pretty bad for black because of these mobile pawns. Very difficult to calculate as well. So c5 all the time. Knight bc4. Knight f4. Knight takes e3. If we look at this scenario, we're threatening quite often knight takes for bishop takes e4. If bishop h7, yeah, we can actually just take on a4 as well though. So it's difficult to manage the threats here. So I mentioned that knight takes e3. If bishop f5, bishop f1, c6, bishop takes c4, we end up winning material. If knight takes e3, f takes, knight c6, yeah, we're just winning material. So bishop g5 tried, knight f4, and now white's accumulating. This is really Steinitz territory, accumulation of advantages. We're getting the bishop pair now, and the dark square bishop without a counterpart. And what's worse, that c7 soft spot, with queen soft spot, only the queen protecting, leads to a very passive looking move, rook c8 having to be played. And now queen c3, taking the queen out of the line of the bishop, means that d5 has e5 even more secure. The pawns are getting dangerous for d6, which would be embarrassing for a knight fork coming up. So like pushing through the center seems so logical and convincing here. If d5 instead, straight away, this is also possible. It is also possible immediately. If knight d3, d takes c7, this is a very good position, knight d6. Knight takes f4, we play knight takes e8, hitting the queen. And here rook d8 is a nice key move to avoid hassle. Looking at the rook. So it ends up clearly in white's favour, the exchange up. So yes, d5 is actually possible. If c6 here, knight c7, bishop takes e5 wins material. If c takes d5, knight takes d6, just knight takes c4 here, we're hitting the queen. Big problem with the black position. Rook takes, hitting the rook, it's just winning material. So we have queen c3 though, so d5 was definitely possible. Knight b8 makes things even worse for black, and it's as though the black pieces are all going back to bed here. So maybe Gukesh didn't sleep too well last night, because his pieces seems to be maybe reflecting that. Maybe it's just sometimes if you win, you're overexcited in over the board chess, and that can lead to a sleepless night. I remember my queen sacrifice game, I video annotated once. I did have a sleepless night after. So maybe, yeah, all the celebrations, I don't know, all the excitement from yesterday's win leads to a position, yeah, which looks like it's such a passive game, and was the pawn structure earlier it just wasn't needed to be so dynamic, and it's kind of backfired. This looks like visually quite painful with d6 coming. The Kibitzers are also screaming about knight a7 just winning a rook. That technically does win the exchange, and it is a winning position as well. But d5 is certainly a very promising winning position as well. Queen d7, we have d6, c5. So if c takes, knight takes, we are forking the rooks. We can just win the exchange there. So c5 played, knight c7, rook f8. The rook's scrambling for safety. If rook e to the 8, funny enough, here b4 is pretty good. If c takes b4, queen takes b4, we've got quite good pawns here, to say the least. This position, knight d5 threatens knight e7 check, forking king and queen. And here, knight e7, we can play even bishop takes h6 by this point. We don't have to think about winning material, we can just go for a checkmate. If g takes, knight takes, the king is just shredded here, because the piece is all kind of huddled. The king's shredded, the queen's cut off, and we end up with a kind of mating attack. This is just one example. Rook d6, and it's just going to be mating if queen takes g6 is allowed. So it's such a huge advantage by this point on b4. Let's recap that again. So queen c6, c5. If knight d5, that's not possible. We just take on d5. So that's this makes this the line. Yeah, knight d5. It's all over here. Or we can just take the exchange to be simple. And bishop takes e4 is also all over. By this point, queen f5, rook e7 is devastating. Bishop e3, bishop d4. This is also completely crushing. So, okay, rook f8 is played, though. Oh, there was one other thing there. If a takes b3, queen takes b3, we're on the knight on b6. And here we can just play knight b5 with the threat of knight a7. If knight 8 d7, knight a7, we can take queens off and just win the exchange. Okay, and e4 is dropping as well. So rook f8, yeah, things have completely disintegrated for black here, basically, by this point. So bishop takes e4. Yeah, Steinitz accumulation of advantages. The thing about that theory, even subtle little advantages, they accumulate to be absolutely devastating later. And you wonder, how on earth did that happen? Yeah, it's very interesting. So b4, though, here is also a move. As you might expect, there's a lot of moves which could give white a massive advantage. If a takes here, queen takes b3, and again, well, knight b5 for knight a7 threatens, and this is also, yeah, it's just going to be winning material, basically. With b6 now here, it's a disaster. c8 now here, disaster. So bishop takes e4, knight c6. The bishop just drops back. Rook c to the 8, knight d5 forcibly wins another pawn, actually, with the knight hit here. It's too grim to consider other things than losing another pawn, in fact. Knight takes is played. If knight a8, which does reflect knight a1 from the game before, the game yesterday, but no, it's not so good here, because bishop takes h6, g takes, knight f6 is kind of devastating, winning the queen with check, etc. And if that's ignored, rook e7 is pretty devastating. This position, d takes e7, forking both rooks. Knight takes f6 check is possible. This is absolutely devastating. So knight takes d5 is played, which loses another pawn now. C takes, the knight goes back. If knight d4, yeah, we're taking on c5, queen b4, rook e7. It's all just crushing, basically, by this point. This point is just crushing. The d pawn is now threatening, well, supporting rook e8. These pass pawns are useful not just for queening, but these hook support squares like e8 is actually, winning here. So knight b8 is played, queen takes c5, rook c8, queen d4, knight a6, rook e7. And I believe it was mentioned, Vishanen said, black could resign here at around this point. We have d7, rook c4, and there is a tactic here. Test your tactics. There is a tactic here which is very convincing for 100 points. It wasn't played. Queen e3 was played, but the tactic was actually the pass pawns is not just about queening, it's the hook squares like e8 and c8. We can actually play queen takes c4 here for rook e8, and it does support d8. It's providing a bridge for that pawn to queen. If queen c5, we just queen. Yeah, this is just devastating. Piece up, material up here. So anyway, queen e3, it's still a devastating position. Rook c2, bishop d6 with this idea of rook e8 now, with the bishop and rook pointing at the rook on f8. Now f6 goes into a forced mate in 8. If b6 had been played, rook e8, queen takes, we are taking on f8 with, and this position to try and distract the queen away from e8. Bishop c5 check, taking, it's just absolutely winning position. A piece up. If h5, bishop f1 is a cool move to make things even better for rook e8. This position absolutely devastating. So f6 is a forced mate in 8. Can you spot it for 10 points? Forced mate in 8. Rook takes g7 check. Now, if king takes g7, yes, the simple part is that we can just queen. And yeah, of course, black doesn't want to play this. It's just a forced checkmate, basically. I'm just showing a forced checkmate sequence. So yeah, rook takes g7 is devastating. If king had gone to h8, queen takes h6, we've undermined h6. So that's checkmate. So the game ended there. Bishop on rook takes g7 check. Yeah, so my impression of the game is that I think black didn't need to play d4. I thought black should have just played a solid and boring approach. It's like those quiz games on TV, like The Chase, one of my favourite TV programmes. If they've got stuff in the bank, then you don't need to take so many risks. Just get all your team members back, etc. Don't take risks. You don't need to get even more money in the cash pot. You need to convert your existing advantage. Sometimes it's not about trying to stretch your advantage. It's about trying to make sure your existing advantage is not theoretical. Just try and convert your existing advantage rather than trying to get more advantage in the match. So this would be just trying to consolidate the existing point lead. I would say a move like going for the solid triangle. The solid triangle is one of the most respected structures in modern, chess. The rise of the Slav defense. Just go for the Slav triangle. That's why the London system's so popular. The Slav triangle in reverse. So I just found this move surprising. It set the tone. A kind of exciting, hyper-modern strategy-fueled game with black centre under fire, and later the backward pawn offering liberation opportunities and targeting c7 in some lines. It was quite fascinating indeed. Okay, so I hope you got a few points from this commentary. I really wanted, just from a theoretical perspective, to examine that slippery slope that black went on to get such a devastatingly bad position. It is quite fascinating to try and understand what happened there. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this game commentary. If you want to check out my Kingscrusher World Championship playlist, kingscrusher.tv/W C 2024. So I'm covering all the games in this match. And my chess courses are at kingscrusher.tv. So I do cover solid openings like the London system, which have been used in this match, and other great skill-based courses like calculation, visualization. You might want to check out my courses page with great discounts linked in to the links there. Okay, yeah, any comments, questions, really appreciated. Even, just hi there, how you felt the game was, that'd be really appreciated. Okay, so the match has now been levelled. Wow, what a match we're having this year. What an exciting match indeed this has turned out to be. Thanks very much.